Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Be the Wolf. I am here today with Alicia Yabara. She is a self defense expert, and also her company, you got to listen to the name, is so good Pretty Hands, Hard Punches. Now, if you're somebody who has held your tongue, and played a little bit small because you were taught to be silent, and maybe you leaned into other people's opinions and checked what they were doing before you decided what you were going to do. There's going to be some resonance in this episode for you. And if you have ever felt fear where you weren't safe in your surroundings, also definitely going to be some resonance in this episode. Alicia, thank you for being here and thank you for being willing to share your story. So, first of all, before we dive into the story, Pretty Hands, Hard Punches, super clever, super punchy, really good. I know when I heard it first, I was super excited. How did you come up with that name?
I don't actually know. It was like 4 in the morning. I was like, "I'm gonna teach women self-defense." I was all empowered, and I started just writing out every type of word that I could think of that went with women's self-defense, and eventually, several hours later, by the morning, I was like, "I Pretty hands, hard punches. That sounds good. I like that one." And it really goes in with my story because at one point in my career of teaching martial arts, I was told that it was my job to look pretty and sell contracts, not
Uh,
teach martial arts. And so, like, it felt like I was just landed on it. It was just one of those where I was like, "This is it. This is the one I'm gonna go with."
for a second there, I thought you were going to say, I used to be a hand model.
No, my hands are not pretty.
I'm sure they're actually probably prettier than you think. But okay, so you have a story about how you ended up here in teaching self defense, becoming a self defense expert. Let's start with little bit before you started taking that journey and about what were you feeling, what was going on with you internally before you started on this path.
I felt very lost, very confused. I had just had my son and I was trying to figure out who I was, what my identity was. I was now a wife and a mother, and I was trying to learn how to keep a house clean. And I had all of these business ambitions, but I didn't quite know where I stood. I had jumped around a lot in my 20s doing different types of things. I had actually had my real estate license when I got pregnant. So I really went every which way. And right before I realized what I knew I wanted to do and I began to follow my passion in building Pretty Hands was just it felt almost like chaos in my body. Like I had severe depression. I had postpartum depression. I couldn't get out of a very negative mindset. And I just woke up feeling like I was inadequate. I was inadequate as a wife. I was inadequate as a woman. I was inadequate as a mother. I was never going to do well in my life. And I was at the time smoking cigarettes. I had been smoking for 10 years. And it really took that one decision. I'm going to quit smoking cigarettes. I need to gain some type of control back. And that started the domino effect of, oh, okay, I'm going to start making healthier decisions. Oh, I need to learn how to set boundaries. And I began to build almost like a Lego house on top of one skill after the other. And that was when I decided, you know what? So many women think that if only they knew how to physically defend themselves, they would be impenetrable to abuse. But the reality is, if you don't know how to protect your mental and emotional space, you are very much vulnerable to abuse, to being a victim, and to being abused, manipulated, or coerced into somebody else's reality.
And that I think kind of goes into the deeper levels of what you do. You're not just, I'm going to teach you the physical stuff about self defense. And I know this is men too. There's this sense of powerlessness that I think a lot of people feel. And especially if you grew up in a household of chaos, then there's a common theme. And subconsciously, I hate to tell you this, everybody, but we subconsciously recreate the same kind of situation that we grew up in our adult lives most of the time. There are some anomalies out there, but the majority of people do that. And I think in a house of chaos, there's a sense of feeling powerless. And sometimes that comes from even being in a crib. Like a lot of times people were taught to let their babies cry it out. And so their voice had no impact. And so there's this sense of the one thing that you can do, because you can't move, you can't run, you can't even sit up as an infant. The one thing you can do is cry. And when that has no impact, there's this powerlessness that sets in, even as an infant child. But as you took control of that one thing, quitting smoking, was it, did it give you a sense of more power in your life?
Yeah, yeah, it did. I remember being outside, my son was maybe 2 years old. My husband was an essential worker. This was during COVID, so everything was amplified, especially in terms of depression, isolation, and I looked in the mirror after smoking a cigarette, and I said to myself, my son is never going to see the weak woman I see in the mirror. This hopeless feeling, he's never going to experience this version of his mother. And in that day, I scheduled an appointment with for a seminar for Alan Carr, Easy Way to Quit Smoking. So if you're any of your listeners are a smoker, I highly suggest looking into that. I walked away from that seminar non-smoker. I'm going on 6 years. And it was like I gained something back. I have done martial arts my whole life. I faced an immense amount of abuse in the martial arts industry, and I never quite had control. And when I spiraled in my early 20s, one of the things I started doing was smoking cigarettes. And it was in that high chaos environment. I was out, I was partying, I got a tattoo, I shotgunned a beer, I started smoking cigarettes. Like, I'm a
It's interesting. You use the word control, but I really feel when I think about control is about fear for me historically. It's about how can I control everything so that I can make the chaos not chaotic. But to me, it feels like you're taking back power. And I think maybe the difference is the word, we all have our different words and different ways we think they mean. But for me, it feels like what you're talking about is you're doing something that you have control over internally rather than just letting the internal stuff that's going on. Oh, I want a cigarette, or oh, I want to escape this feeling. I want this dopamine hit. I want this belonging. I want this. So it was about you facing the internal stuff and being able to stand in the internal stuff and being able to control that rather than trying to control your surroundings. Does that sound accurate at all for you?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things when you're a smoker, and I was a pack a day smoker, right? Your entire day is controlled by when you get your next cigarette. When can I get that hit again? When can I get the nicotine hit again? Right. And it's almost like there's a little monster on your shoulder that's like, you need a cigarette, you need a cigarette. And so when I say I started to gain control, I felt like I was taking my power back. Okay, I don't need this external thing telling me what to do. I get to decide what I'm going to do with my time without that with that understanding of I don't need to go outside. I don't need to smoke a cigarette. I'm okay. And you're absolutely right. Power and control, they tend to go hand in hand and they can almost sometimes be used interchangeably depending on your experience which each of the with each of those words.
Yeah, and it's where you're come from is a big piece of it. So I know for me, when I used to smoke and I was a bartender, it was always like, oh, I don't get a break. And like, when am I going to get that next cigarette? And it was about being a break. I can't take a break without having a reason, which for me was a really big thing. I can't get what I want without it being wrapped in what somebody else wants or what's other people is acceptable. So you don't get what you want condition free. You have to fit within the conditions of other people. And in that, for me, smoking was also, I don't get to feel better or good until I have this cigarette. I don't get in with drinking too, or whatever dopamine hit that anybody is chasing. I don't get to feel good without this. And so when we go back to self-defense, I know I had a friend who was a man who started taking martial arts, and he felt so much more powerful and safe because he felt like he could handle situations. But I know the bigger thing was that the process of him studying the martial arts and going through all of that gave him a greater sense of internal control. So, yes, of course, he could handle a situation if it happened, but that internal thing shifted too. And I think that was the more dramatic transformation for him. Tell me about your journey to studying martial arts, to teaching martial arts.
Oh, yeah. Okay. This one's a little bit long-winded, so just
All right, I'm here for it.
grab your coffee. I started martial arts at 6 years old. I wanted to be a ninja. I was like, "I'm gonna go in the sewer. I'm gonna take my instructions from a rat named Spike, right? Like, this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna eat pizza." I wanted to be a Ninja Turtle. I was all about it. That was my life. Chuck Norris, Bruce Lee, that was like the shit to me. My friends all wanted to be like ballerinas and princesses. I was literally throwing ninja stars at my back fence at
Love
7
it.
years old. I knew exactly what I wanted to do for my very first class. I was like, if I can't go to Japan and train for 20 years to be a ninja, I'm going to be a martial arts instructor. And so from 6 years old until 21, I worked nonstop on a singular goal to be a martial arts instructor, to own my own school. But with that came a lot of abuse because back when I did this, this was in the early 90s, where there wasn't a lot of girls in the martial arts industry in general. It wasn't like it is today. I was often the only girl. And as I got older, I was definitely the only girl, right? And so that became an open vulnerability for me when it came to the instructors in my life because they knew that was my goal. And so I did everything that I could possibly get my hands on. I watched all of the martial arts movies. I was on the demo team. I became the director of the demo team. I was in the black belt club. I did competitions for 10 years. I really delved into the martial arts lifestyle in taekwondo, in karate. I studied Hapkido. I did Muay Thai. I did Brazilian Jiu Jitsu for a while. I wanted to be just the best at it all. And when I hit 21, I had already been through two major, very abusive situations. I was groomed by my instructor from 13 to
Mhm.
16. He was 21 to 24. He ultimately introduced me to my first romantic relationship. He gave me my first real kiss when I was 15 years old. He was 22. He controlled every aspect of my life. And then when he ultimately took my virginity, right after I turned 16, and I started asking questions. Now I feel like I'm his equal, right? I'm 16, we're having a sexual relationship. Now I feel like I can talk to him adult to adult. He started treating me like a child at that point because he didn't like that I was questioning him. And when I decided, hey, I can't handle this, you've been lying to me, you've been manipulating me, and I started to recognize.
So before you guys had sex, you were just not questioning him, you were being like more submissive, and then after you became more, hey, you felt like you had more of a voice, at least for a little while. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so he actually had a pregnant fiance when all of this was going on. And he had told me that they weren't really together, that they were just acting together because she was pregnant and it would look bad on his martial arts school. Before that, before we had the actual sex, one of the things he would tell me is if you want to be treated like an adult, adults in relationships have sex. That's what we do. So when I lost my virginity to him, I thought, okay, I have given you this gift. Now you're going to treat me as an adult because that's what you told me. And then the script flipped real quick because then it was like, now he's going to get in trouble if I tell anyone. So he told me that I was a slut, I was a whore, that I had tempted and seduced him, and that if I told anyone what happened, he would ruin my reputation and my career in the martial arts industry because no grown man was going to want to train with a teenage girl who made up stories about her instructor. And I
Yeah.
knew that he was right. I knew that if he started telling people I was making up all these lies, I would never have a career in martial arts. So my everything that I could say, I completely internalized and I just shut down completely
So,
at that point.
yeah, going back to before you guys had sex, were you having those feelings of wanting to say things, but feeling like you couldn't? Did it feel like,
Yeah.
okay, so there was something in you that was, I'm going to make up a story here. You confirm or deny or be like, you're crazy. I don't know what you're talking about. But is the sense that, hey, there's this person in authority, in an authority position. And so therefore, what they say is right, what they say and think and feel is right. And what I say, think, and feel is wrong. So I'm just going to keep my mouth shut to stay safe. That's my story, literally. So I don't know if it's yours, but what was your experience of that dynamic?
It was very similar. You almost dead on. It was one of those where in martial arts specifically, one of the reasons it can be so dangerous for young women specifically and young men, but I usually speak to young women, is because one of the things you're taught, especially if you start at a young age, is to disregard your own voice and your own
Mm.
boundaries in favor of what your master tells you to do. He knows better. He's a better person. He's trained longer. So you push your feelings aside in order to do what you're told by them. Now, that can be used in a good way from a good, healthy instructor. You don't want to do 10 push ups, you only want to do 8, and they tell you, hey, you can do it. You got this. Do those 2 more push ups, and you push yourself. But it can get dangerous in my situation because I wasn't mature enough and I didn't have enough life experience to truly understand the difference of when my body and my intuition was telling me something was wrong and when I was just wanting to give up on something like not doing as many push-ups as I probably could. And I looked to my instructor, the adult in the room, to tell me which was the right way to go. And he used that power and authority to ultimately groom me for his own sexual gratification. And then when it came to being held responsible, he turned it around and then all of a sudden it was all my fault, right? And now I did all of these things. And when you're taught to disregard your boundaries, your lines, your limits in favor of what this adult is saying, then it's easy to believe it's all your fault. And I did believe. I didn't believe that he had ever done anything wrong until I started Pretty Hands.
It For me, I know that a big part of it, let me backtrack. I think one of the things about coaching and any type of position like that, it's really important to always be working on your shit and make sure you're coming from as clean of a place as possible. I've watched so many documentaries on cult leaders and stuff like that because I want to pay attention to how I'm showing up and how I am making sure that I'm not doing some of that stuff because that stuff is typically because your instructor had internal shit. He would never have done that if he didn't have internal shit of where he needed to control and do things in not the greatest way. And then the other piece is if you had a background of abuse like I did, where there's that thing where it's hard to trust the body because some things that aren't a threat anymore show up as a threat internally in the body. And so one of the things that gets like super confusing is that not understanding what's real and what's not real with what's going on with what your body is trying to tell you. And I'm going to take a guess after this experience, it probably got a little bit hard to distinguish what was like the right thing for your body telling you and not what was it was hard to distinguish the clues that your body was telling you, I'm gonna guess.
I was taught to disregard my body. I didn't listen to my body at all because I
Um,
was always taught you just keep pushing through it. You keep going. You just don't stop.
yeah,
And I did grow up in a chaotic household also. My escape was martial arts. So when I faced abuse within martial arts, it wasn't the same type of abuse I had faced at home. So I was like, "Oh no, this is normal. This is something that I should be experiencing. This is just what happens in martial arts." I also, and I'll reiterate this really quick, I didn't have any like strong female leaders to look up to. There were no female instructors. So everything I was looking up to were all grown men. And they were all telling me, this is normal. This is normal. You're an attractive young lady. You're going to be beautiful when you get older. Like all of the adults in my life didn't seem to have a problem with this instructor giving me so much attention. So I disregarded every uncomfortable feeling. It was like I did have a little bit of when this was happening right around 15, right before I turned 16, I would start to ask questions like, okay, you're saying you guys are broke up, but she's at the school with you. So are you actually broken up? And he would explain it away. And he would explain it in a way that I couldn't argue with. There was no arguing. But yeah, we're not together. I've already told you that because she's pregnant, she is going to be around. And
yeah,
he even encouraged me to create a friendship with her so that I could co-parent and raise his baby with her.
wow.
And it goes to my immaturity that I truly thought that was somehow going to work out without blowing up. But
Yeah, even if you did grow up in a chaotic household, I don't know about you, but for me, in my chaotic household, I would just bend the story into whatever they said, didn't disregard what I was feeling because that's what kept me safe. And so that made me super ripe for that kind of behavior outside of my childhood as well.
yeah, I would romanticize my experience as a child and I would make up stories that made me feel better. But as an adult looking back, my son would never experience any of the stuff I went through. He's nope, not at all. He lives in a very clean, healthy house, right? We have routines. We don't have people live with us. I went the complete opposite after I had my son. I declutter all the time. My house growing up was a hoarder house. And my mom was addicted to pain pills and she was an alcoholic. My dad was an alcoholic. They both smoked weed. They both grew weed in our backyard at a time where it was not legal, right? So
A very similar childhood.
yeah. So, and both of my brothers were drug addicts. They were addicted to meth. And I was the only kind of normal one. And I would go and I would do martial arts. And one of the things that I think it's important when we're talking about being silenced is when we talk about the age difference between me and my instructor at 8 years, right? As a child, the adults around you are the ones who make the decisions for what you do. You can't get a license without your parents' signature and without getting a certain grade average. You can't get a job. You can't file for financial aid without your parents, right? There's all these things that society tells us we have to have adult permission to do. And when the adult is making the permission for what you can do, but also using it for his own sexual gratification, there is really no way for a child to distinguish between an adult that loves them and an adult that's using them. And that was the confusion I faced at 16. And I was ultimately blamed for what happened. I was told that I shouldn't have allowed that to happen. My own father told me, I can't believe I spent all this money to make you a black belt and to turn you into a black belt for you to sleep with your instructor.
Yeah.
And it was like, now I have the other adults in my life telling me, "Oh, this is also your fault. This is you."
I get that. Another similar story. One of the things I'm thinking of is, and this is such a be the wolf thing. Not everybody breaks out of their childhood dynamic. Not everybody breaks out of the cage that they grew up in. You just said your brothers were drug addicts. And so they followed into that same cage. And you, at a very young age, wanted something different. You're like, I'm going to be a ninja. And you kept going. And I think one of the things about people like you is that because there's this knowing that something more is possible. And even if you keep hitting a ceiling and keep hitting your head against the wall, for some of us, there's this desire and tenacity to just keep pushing forward because we know, I don't know if we got some divine download or what exactly it was, but something in us knows that something better is possible. And I see that in your story. And it's part of the other side of it is that a lot of my clients have this, and there's something big, I think, that you're meant to give to the world that's a little different than maybe the rest of the people in your family. So you move on, you start questioning everything. Where did you start to understand that, hey, maybe my mission in this life is about a little bit more than just being a martial arts instructor?
So I have to backtrack a little bit to give some context before I say that. So after that happened with my instructor, I moved out of my house at 17 because my dad made me feel awful about what happened. I worked 3 jobs through my senior year, and as soon as I graduated high school, I moved down to Southern California from my hometown in Northern California. I grew up in Modesto, and I packed up my little sidekick. This is a 94. I loved that little cheap Jeep. And I moved down and I took a job as a professional martial arts instructor, and I got back on track, right? I diverted throughout my senior year. I got back on track and I came down and I was so excited to start the next step. And immediately the grandmaster introduced me to his son. And now I was no longer a professional martial arts instructor. I was dating the boss's son. And so I spent the next 3 years in a highly controlled, very cult like environment. And this will come into play later on when I tell a little bit more of the story about how I started the business. This man controlled every aspect of my life and every aspect. He controlled my romantic relationship, my career. He chose the clothes I wore. He chose the classes I went to school for. He chose everything. It even got to the point where when I asked for the raise that I was promised, I was told that soon I would be married to his son. So I didn't need a raise because the moment we got married, I was going to start having babies. And when I had babies, I was going to need to take care of them. So they needed to give his son, my fiance, the raise. And I needed to learn to budget better. And so he would have me print out all of my financial documents every week, and he would go through and highlight everything I shouldn't be spending money on.
Wow.
So that type of level of control. And everyone around him, because he was the grandmaster, he was a pillar of the community. He was high up in all of the wherever you get credentials, all of those organizations. I felt so hopeless and quiet. I could not stand up because in normal life, you get angry, you yell at your boss, or you say something wrong, you get fired and you go find a new job, right? But for me, it was if I tried to stand up for myself, I was not only gonna get fired, but I was going to get blackballed. I was gonna lose my career. I was gonna lose my place of business. I was gonna lose my fiance. I was gonna lose my community. So now it felt like there was so much more leverage on his side where the couple of times I did try to stand up for myself, like I was fired, dumped, and sent home. My boyfriend's mom broke up with me at Denny's the first time I ever stood up for myself to this grandmaster. My boyfriend didn't even talk to me. His mom was like, "We're done with you. Go home."
Wow.
And then they called me back. And then I stayed for a few more months. I got fired again. And this was the time that it truly felt hopeless. Not only did I overcome so much throughout so many years of just being a woman in the martial arts industry, facing the grooming, but now I was told verbatim by this grandmaster that it was my job to look pretty and sell contracts. I was never going to own my own school. I was never going to be a head instructor. I was more fuckable than anything else. And the only reason a man would ever train with me is to try to have sex with me. So if I didn't want to get on board with the family goals, then we were going to have a problem. And I realized years later what he was truly training me to be was not a instructor. It was the wife of an instructor. It was the wife of a school owner, to
Got it.
silently, submissively, and humbly support my husband and his family goals. And that shit did not fly. So from there, I ended up in a highly abusive relationship after leaving that situation. I had to fight for my life against an abuser who didn't know any martial arts. He was just a jerk. But I had already been silenced for so long that when he started telling me it was my fault he was hitting me, I believed him. I was like, there must be something wrong with me. I did all of these things wrong, all these people, right? And so I left that relationship just a shell of the person I was. I was just shy of turning 22 years old by the time all of this happened. Went into college. I got a degree in information technology to build websites and do marketing. And then I met and married my now husband, who is an incredible man, and I absolutely love him and adore him. And he is not
Yay!
abusive in any way. I always like
Amazing.
to
We
say
worked
that.
hard. Amazing.
And we did really well for the first about 5 years. We bought a house, we got married, we did everything. Then we had a baby. And when we had a baby, I went through postpartum depression and all that trauma, all of that self-doubt, inadequacy, fear, all came just rushing back. I felt like I was hit by a tidal wave. And it was coming out of that I realized I needed to make these changes. That was when I quit smoking cigarettes.
Yeah.
And I was actually watching a lot of cult shows, just like you. So we got a lot in common. And I had watched Sarah Edmondson from the A Little Bit Culty podcast. And before her and her husband started that, they had been on The Vow. And she had done an interview where she had said, if Keith Raniere, which was the cult leader of her cult, if you could
Right.
say anything to him right now, what would you say? And she stubbornly looked up and she's like, I'd say he messed with the wrong girl. And I was like, fuck it. I'm going to open a women's self defense business and I'm going to teach every woman I know to recognize the red flags I missed because I was so confident in my ability to physically defend myself. I didn't understand when I was being mentally and emotionally manipulated.
Yeah. And it's a full package, right? The body, the mind, the emotions, the spirit. It's all one thing. And I think sometimes we get really focused on, oh, I'm going to only work on my business and I'm only going to do work on this. And we compartmentalize it, but we're one holistic being. Being the wolf is about being all of who you are and reclaiming all the parts of you that have been suppressed and repressed. And a thing that I think is really important, and especially for those people who are more susceptible to manipulation, abuse, and culty shit, is I think there's one thread that comes through is that there is a belief that came in from childhood or a way of experiencing the world where what you want has to be fit within the frame of what the person nearest to you wants or your family dynamic, whatever it is. And so it almost doesn't matter who it is or where, like how off the chain they are. But if you have that belief that what you want has to be fit in the frame of what they want, that almost anybody can manipulate you because you're already in that patterning of just going to shrink who you are to fit into their thing.
Yeah, one of the things I realized when I started Pretty Hands, originally I didn't realize how much mental and emotional aspects went into self-defense. I was like, I'm just going to teach women how to physically be more powerful. What do you do if he grabs your hair or he grabs your wrist or he tries to choke you, which is what my abuser did to me. And then shortly into developing my curriculum, I was like, this something's wrong. This isn't right. Something's missing. And I realized that what makes people so susceptible to these cult-like environments and to being manipulated so easily is that they lack boundaries. They're taught from a very young age not to have boundaries. They don't really understand what boundaries are. So often even as adults, when we set a boundary, it is a reaction. It's a reaction to something we don't like. Somebody
Mhm.
said something you don't like, they did something you don't like, and you say, "Hey, I don't like that. This is my boundary." But when you're setting it on the fly, it can easily be talked away because you have no anchor. You have no, why am I setting that boundary? You just know, hey, this doesn't feel right. So, what I teach in my business is we start with setting boundaries. we start with understanding what we want out of life. And so I ask all of my students these 5 questions to get them started. It's called building the ideal version of yourself. And it's when you think of that ideal version of you, what does she look like? What does she feel like? What are her boundaries? How does she handle her boundaries being disrespected? And who does she allow in her life? And as they begin to answer each question and build on it, once they have a good vision of themselves, I say, now sit down and let's talk about what boundaries she's allowing.
Yeah.
What are her lines? Because the thing I found and the thing that worked so much against me as a young woman was I had no line. I was always looking for someone else to set my boundary for me. And
Yeah.
so when you allow that, the other person, whether they have the best of intentions for you or not, they are always going to set it for their advantage. So now what I teach and what your listeners need to understand is you have to start drawing those lines for yourself. You have to start saying, this is what I do allow in my life. This is what I don't allow. And then you have to really answer that question of, why? And that's where the ideal version of yourself comes in. Because for me, one of the things I have very severe allergies. I'm actually severely allergic to cats. I've almost died a couple of times over them. And so I don't allow anyone in my life that doesn't take my allergies seriously because I know that the risk of that is me not being here anymore. So that is a very hard boundary for me. And it took me a really long time to understand that there's not just different types of boundaries, but there's different levels. There's flexible boundaries, there's inflexible boundaries, there's hard boundaries. And when we start teaching women and women start to understand, I do get to live my ideal version of who I want to be, and I'm going to set my boundaries for her. Now it's no longer a reaction to something you don't like. Now it's preemptive of the way you want to live.
And I think one of the things that comes up for me with boundaries is there's a point where I don't really have to draw boundaries anymore because I am just like you. At some point, it transforms and it changes, and people don't overstep those boundaries because you just are that person, which is a really interesting thing. And so far, different from there was this very transformative point in my life where all of a sudden I had done some transformational work and I realized, holy shit, I exist as a separate entity as everybody else because my existence had been in response to everybody else. And in that, I had zero boundaries, just like you were saying. And so I love this idea of, okay, picturing the ideal person, really understanding what those edges of that person are until you grow into that person and become that person. But the vision of it is such a useful tool. And then being able to, even if you're drawing those boundaries and it's a little messy when you're doing it at the beginning and it's, oh shit, I let them go too far and you got to try and clean, like all of that stuff is okay. It's just part of the process.
Yeah, give yourself grace. And the thing is, it's funny because I asked myself those questions on a whim right after I quit smoking cigarettes. And
Perfect.
I was not the woman today. I wore my hair differently. I didn't wear any makeup. I definitely didn't have my pink blazers that I wear all the time. But when I was envisioning myself, I had a very clear picture of what I wanted to show up as a woman, as a wife, as a mother. I knew exactly where I wanted to go. And it took years. It was slowly building. It was like, okay, I'm going to maybe buy some floral dresses because I really like summer dresses. And I'm going to learn to bake sourdough, right? I'm going to learn these things. And so I had a few that I anchored into my mind. And now, just like you, I don't have to set boundaries. I don't have to say, hey, you're crossing a boundary. I can recognize the feeling in myself of whether I want someone in my life or not very quickly after meeting them. Right. And I don't question that gut feeling either because our gut feeling is truly the best form of self defense we can have. You trust your gut and you will walk away from the guy that looks very attractive and is saying all the right things,
Yeah,
but there's something that feels off. And you don't have to try to convince yourself that you're wrong. You don't have to try to convince yourself of maybe I'm overreacting because you're simply not there.
totally. Before I ask you the final question, how do people get in touch with you?
Oh, so you can find me at Pretty Hands Hard Punches all across social media. My email address is prettyhandshardpunches@gmail.com, and my website is prettyhandshardpunches.com.
Nice and easy. Okay, so the final question, what does being the wolf mean to you?
Being the wolf means to me is taking that power and control back and not allowing anyone to treat me like a sheep.
Nice. Nice. Thank you so much, Alicia, for sharing your story. And such, I forget sometimes how inspirational sharing a story is when you come from such a, it's hard for me to say because it's a little reflection of my story too. It's like when you come from such a chaotic and difficult and unpredictable place, and then you get taken advantage of over and over again, and you come out the other side. It's just so important for people to hear these stories, to know that there is another side. And sometimes I forget how inspirational the stories are. And then I have a guest like you, and I'm like, oh, yeah, this is why you tell your story. This is why I tell my story. And it's so freaking important. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. This was such a great conversation.
Awesome. And remember, everybody, when you be the wolf, humanity evolves. We'll see you all next time.